Hey, thank you guys so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. If you've never been here before, thank you so much for being here. I have a really special guest with me. It's the beginning of the year. I'm going to actually have you introduce yourself to my audience. If you could tell people your name and where you're from.
Sure. I'm the transition expert with and founder of LifeCycle Transitions.
Okay, thank you so much for being here. So, one of the things we're talking about today is hoarding, but what we're going to learn from Brandon is like kind of how he got started. So, did you know growing up that this is the career path you were going to take?
No, not at all. Um, my earlier career was in more or less in business development. My family grew up in human services. My mom worked as a social worker, case manager. My stepfather was in law enforcement, and so on and so forth. But I never thought that I would work in this capacity. Working with people the way that I did. I always had a passion for understanding what people were going through and how I can come up with a game plan, which is why business development and sales was a good fit for me because it allowed me to connect with people on a different level.
Okay, so business development, but not, but you've been in the world like growing up, you've seen like your family work with people and help people. Did you find yourself drawn to that when you seen it? Or did you understand what they were doing or why they were doing it?
No, but I was always infatuated with behaviors and why people did what they do. Much like yourself, there's so much about trauma and what people have gone through in different stages of their lives that reflects why they respond to things that they're going through presently. And I think that niche in my earlier days working in an unrelated field in business development translated well to the career path that I pursued years later. A career in business development was really, really good at it. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I
Mm,
moved to Boston about 14 years ago. I had a job opportunity working with a internet marketing company during the earlier days with Google as a reseller, and I was given an interview to come to Boston. And at the time I was in between jobs, and I literally had like $60 in my pocket, and I got on a. I remember talking to a good friend of mine about this terrific opportunity, and realizing that I was low on funds. But he basically told me, he said, look, if you're going to go after it, you need to pursue it. But I remember hearing Les Brown's motivational speech or
that's my
spill.
guy. I love Les
Yeah,
Brown.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm listening.
I remember him saying, I would rather be prepared for an opportunity and have no opportunity than have an opportunity and not be prepared. So I remember talking to my good friend Ndueso. I haven't talked to him in many years. I hope he's doing well. But talking to him about the transit system, because initially they wanted me to interview in New York, and so I asked him, I said, what would it take for me to take the transit system from the south side of Chicago all the way to Dan Ryan, and obviously catch the plane to Manhattan, and go from there to my interview, which at that point I think was 11:35, 11:45. And he said, dude, no one, and I've never been on a plane at that point. He said, no one gets on a plane on the day of their interview with $60 and do it the way you're trying to do it on a public transportation. And but those quotes from Les Brown echoed in my mind, and I took that
Wow.
chance, and I've been taking chances ever since then. And it's accredited to facing those fears that I encourage my clients to go through every day.
Wow, that's amazing. I just for the record, my clients, if you follow me, you know Les Brown is one of my favorite. I listen to him every day, and I
Yeah.
remember that quote. And so for people that are hearing this, it sounds like coming here to Boston was a huge transition because South Side of Chicago, the lifestyle there in Boston was different. What was that transition like for you coming from that to this?
Oh, it was polar opposite. It was a complete culture shock for me. I
Hmm.
hadn't been exposed to so much culture, so many different ethnicities.
Hmm.
I had to learn, that there's a difference, and
Hmm.
that just because a person's skin was the same complexion as mine didn't necessarily mean that
Hmm.
we came from the same origin. And I had
Hmm.
to learn, the different nuances and how people communicated, how they didn't
Mhm.
communicate in some cases in New England. Uh, And a good friend of mine told me, he said, listen, when you get out on the East Coast, he said, in the Midwest, we tend to, before we talk about business, we talk about the cows and the chickens, and we build small talk into something more significant. He said, when you get out there in the Northeast, in the East Coast particular, they're going to talk about one thing. And he reached towards his wrist and he said, they're going to talk about time. So you're going to have to be very quick, right to the point, and get it, because they're not going to let you wait. They're not going to wait for it.
That is so true. So in Chicago, they speak to people.
Yeah, we not
Oh,
only speak,
okay.
but we actually establish a little bit of eye contact every now and again.
So for listeners that's not from Massachusetts or New England, we're really cold. They call it we're really cold. We're
Yeah,
not
it's
that we're
evening.
bad people.
No, no, you know what it is, and it's funny. Years later, since after being here now 13 years, 13 plus years, um, it's it's become a common state for me, because you don't know you're doing it until I myself have went back home, and my cousins and relatives like, dude, what's wrong with you? What's with this attitude? So
That's
you have to
funny.
adjust to it. Yeah, and I remember I went to the West Indies once. I went on a vacation to Bermuda, and we must have been on a bus, and we drove past this small town, and I remember a guy waving at us as we were on the bus, and then we got to like the bar area, and it was like maybe 20, 30 minutes later, he came back and he's like, look, I waved at you about 3 miles ago. You didn't wave back. Everything okay, bro? I had to realize, I had to check myself and realize, maybe I need to get a little bit more personal.
That's so funny. So now you end up in Boston in this interview. Did you get the job?
I did. Yeah, I did. I
Okay.
mean, I'm very fortunate that in my career in business development and sales, which was the thing that pulled me away from the traditional college route, have been very fruitful for me. I've been successful. I moved around a little bit around that time. It was during the housing crunch and the recession.
Hmm.
And I had was working with the Google reseller, and then I left that company, selling oil for a brief stint, and for a company called Global Petroleum. It was very short. It didn't work out, and it was disappointing. But at that point, I took another job and eventually started this company, that I ended up making my own for many
Yes.
years later.
Yes. And I want to talk about that before I go into life cycles. Out of curiosity, because we're around the same age, and when I grew up, I always thought like only in order for me to make it, I had to go to college. Now
Mhm.
luckily I went into a career where it was like I was able to benefit off of it.
Uh-huh.
But so many people don't benefit off of it. What, like, where did you realize like business or entrepreneurship was the move for you, especially being like a black man in America? I don't think it's something we really think about.
Well, that's for me. It's always been something that I was incredibly infatuated by. Growing up in the South Side of Chicago, the role models that I had wasn't always uh, idyllic. They were unfortunately people that didn't necessarily make their way the more legal way, and I never was drawn to that lifestyle. I remember my first sales job uh, was interviewing for a used car dealership on the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood called Inglewood. And I remember going past my buddies, that were out and about on the block, and catching the bus and wearing my grandfather's winter blend suit from the 70s. And I don't know if you know anything about those hand-me-downs from the 70s. They got a peculiar itch. I think their wool was made from a different cloth, let me tell you. So I, I remember going past my good friends and getting on the bus. And I remember I even had my grandfather's briefcase back then, when briefcases were popular. And
You thought
I,
you was doing it. You was doing it.
I thought I was doing it. And I have nothing inside of that briefcase but a pen and a calculator. And I remember walking past the guys and getting on the bus, and everyone thought I was weird. But my role models were more from a theatrical standpoint. I remember watching Michael J. Fox and all these
Mm.
guys that were in sales, and they were quick, they were witty, they were mover and shakers, and I wanted to be like them. And they inspired me. in ways that maybe my surrounding areas didn't. So when I remember interviewing for that job on the west side of Chicago and south side of Chicago, I mean, and the interviewer, was talking to me. He's like, you got, you got a lot of charisma and you seem to be very interested in the position and very eager. He's like, I want to give you this opportunity, but can I ask you what's inside that briefcase? And I said, dreams, dreams. and ever since then, he gave me a shot, and the rest was history.
Wow, that's so. And so for people listening, because one thing that I try to do is help people shift their mindset. And even though you weren't in an environment that really promoted your development, it seems like you just like forced yourself to look at other things and embrace. And back when we were growing up, we didn't have the access we have now to
Um,
looking at other like healthy material. So at the end of the day, I feel like I tell people it's kind of a choice, and I get that sometimes our environment doesn't promote certain
right.
things. But I feel like now we have so much access to, like, does that make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's familiarity breeds content, and if you're around an element for so long, you're going to either be enticed by it, encouraged by it, or discouraged
Yeah.
by it. And
Yeah.
and in my case, I was always a lone wolf. And I encourage people that want to be successful to have that same mindset. You're
Yeah.
you're going to do things that isn't. You're going to think things that aren't necessarily popular, and you're going to
Mhm.
feel things that no one else is going to feel. And when you're looking for that reassurance or that comfort from your peers and they're not going through or seeing the same thing you see, it can
Mhm.
take you down a dark corridor. So you have to be comfortable with being alone
Yeah.
and being in your own skin and figuring things
Yeah.
out your own way.
And a big part of so when I think about like me going to school, like, and people would be like, "Why are you doing that?" Like, they would call me white for going to school, or I thought I
Mhm.
was better than. But that stuff didn't feel good. But I think what allowed me to keep going was knowing where I wanted to go. I didn't know how I
Absolutely.
was gonna get there, but I knew I didn't want to. I didn't want to be. I didn't want to go the same route I seen people in my environment go.
Mhm.
And so it sounds like for you, even though like you were able to see some things and embrace certain aspects of what you've seen with the briefcase and and you knew where you was going. You didn't know you was gonna have life cycles, but you knew you weren't gonna be on the block,
No,
right?
I never thought for a
Yeah.
second. I mean, no matter how difficult things got or bleak, I never gave hope. I gave up on hope of knowing what I wanted, who I was, and where I was headed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good. So you did your marketing, you got the job, you did a few different jobs. And then how did you finally transition into life cycles? Because you started going from the gate full time, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was 12 years ago. I was looking to get out of corporate America. At that point, I had worked for a number of companies, and it
Mm-hmm.
just never panned out for me. And I always felt that there was a higher power. God had a different plan on what He wanted my future to be, and there were things that I needed to go through to get through. And I think I had outstayed my time in corporate America, and I felt like I, I knew what I wanted to do and when I wanted to do it. I just didn't know necessarily how, but I knew that it was time for me to be an entrepreneur because I had made millions and millions of dollars for companies that I've worked for.
Mm-hmm.
I had an 85% close rate in business.
Dang.
I don't think there's anybody that has ever been better at understanding people and what they want, what they need, and being able to figure out a way to convey that in a simple form that most people can relate to. So I did
Yeah.
well in that realm, but I wasn't fulfilled in that realm. I wanted something that was a little bit more meaningful, and I wanted it to be mine. So initially, I started a my goal was to go into just starting a business because even then I had the foresight to say one door is going to lead to another door, but I got
Was
to
that
open one
scary
door.
though?
It
You're
was,
you're doing 85% rate, you're like doing well, and then
mhm.
to go, because sometimes how you said you was tired of corporate America. Some people are tired and they still stay in their position because they're so comfortably uncomfortable. But what was that like emotionally like for you to go and jump off ship like that?
It was horrifying. I mean, it was terrifying. I
Okay.
started during a recession, during the housing crunch. The country was going through a huge transformation. People were losing their jobs, their houses, and it was scary. But for me, fear has never been something that's ever derailed or curtailed my ambition. I've often used it as a sail to get me where I needed to go.
Wow.
And in that case, I started a property preservation company that was designed. I heard the idea of a company that focused on taking distressed properties that were and getting them into bank ready condition. And you will go in and do all these things and get the houses in what they refer to as conveyance. And I saw that opportunity and took my business development experience and went out and got 8 or 10 different contracts. And I did that in a
Mhm.
short period of time. And I got my first work order. So I got my website, I got everything set up, got all the insurances, got everything that needed to get done. And I got my very first work order. And the first work order was to change to clean a frozen toilet with fecal matter and to shovel 6 feet of snow. And they were going to give me, I believe at the time, $60 for the fecal matter, which was in a frozen toilet. And they were giving me $35 to shovel the snow, after their discounts. And I remember talking to my then good friend at the time about that. And she was telling me that, let me get this right. You're going to go and shovel 6 feet, 3 feet or 6 feet of snow. You're going to clean a frozen toilet with fecal matter, and you're going to do this for $75, $85. And it sounded just like my good buddy in Dueso talking about New York. So you're going to go to New York for $60. and, and I'm like, absolutely, because again, Les Brown, I'd rather be prepared for an opportunity and have an opportunity to have an opportunity to be prepared. So I took on that challenge. Like I have taken on many challenges before. I get out
Wow.
there, and by the grace of God, it was something entirely different. I shoveled the snow, and it was true enough. It was frozen fecal matter. We addressed that. I won't go into the gory details about that,
That's okay.
but
We get it.
when I went to the property, there was a property check that we needed to fill out that basically told us that what was going on with the property. And I filled out that check, and I called the company, the contractor, and said, we're about to get out of here. We took the before and after pictures, and she said, whoa, 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 there's debris, there's all these different things in there. You have to do that. I'm like, okay. And she's like, yeah. And if you do that, you're gonna make it. She calculated it. It was like $3,500. So I took an opportunity that was $60, $85, and I made that by simply going and getting there. It turned into being something a little bit much more than I expected. And that goes to say with a lot of people, when they let things discourage them, they never know what's going to happen when you get there. Who are you going
Yeah.
to meet?
Yeah. That I'm glad you shared that kind of like frozen toilet fecal matter thing, because I think that social media is not bad, but I think sometimes people allow social media to ruin their mindset around the way like life works or the way transitions work or entrepreneurship. Like where you are now, no one would have thought like you had started with shoveling snow and getting fecal
Uh,
matter for less than $100. You
oh
know what I
yeah,
mean?
as symbolically as it sounds, I got it out the mud. Honestly, I got it out the mud. And let me tell you, that was a humbling experience for me because I had came from corporate America. A very good career and working wearing suits all the time, and starting my own company was for the most part very humbling because in the earlier days, I didn't have the best talent. I had guys that had good hearts, but had some difficulty in their life and challenges that made them a little bit harder to employ for people in those earlier days. And I learned the hard way, having to take those challenges on and understand how to make things easier on myself. But I did it, and I did it, for the first 3, 4 years. But at the beginning of the business, let me just break down what the company was.
Hmm.
We first started out as a company that was focused on the commercial market, working with Bank of America, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac, taking these distressed and dilapidated properties and getting them in conveyance condition. I got so good at that within the first year, not even the first year, maybe 8 months in, I had seven trucks. I had a crew of about 30 guys, and we were doing about 35 or 45 homes per month. And I thought that was going to be the direction that we pursued. And but then we ran into a bump along the way where we got a hold of a contractor who was a predator. He took advantage of his contractual agreements that stipulated that we needed to do the work in a very short period of time, 4 or 5 days, and he would do a net 45, net 60. Now, if you know anything about business, for a startup company that's basically paying your payroll and your crew and your services out of your own pocket, net 45, net 60 means you need to have someone that's going to be banking you or a line of credit at a bank or something like that. And this was the earlier stages. So we had at that point, maybe I want to say 100 projects underneath our belt. And I remember having that meeting with my then partner at the time, who was also an accountant. And she said, look, she gave me a really good lesson on mistaking activity for productivity. She said, you're busy and I see the effort, I see the work, I see what you're doing, I see what you built, but we're not making any money. We're not really cutting things the way that we should. And and she explained how that we were doing this work and we were invoicing this particular company and we would wait for the company to basically distribute the funds. But we weren't getting the funds in the time that they agreed. And when they did pay, they, instead of them paying what we saw, they paid almost half of what we invoiced. And that went on through all the invoices to the point where it was pretty apparent that they weren't planning on paying us. So at that point, I remember sitting on the stoop at one of the projects and contemplating closing the door, and even my partner telling me, maybe we need to shut this down and, start over, and maybe you need to, do something different. And I looked at her like I've looked at every other challenge in my life. And I said, no, not me. I said, we figured something out. We figured out a way to get out of that situation. We settled, we negotiated, we did what we needed to do so that we could cover our loss. But while this was going on, I remember being on the porch of this particular house and seeing a family portrait of a home that we were transitioning, because as a property preservation company, these were houses during the housing crunch that were going into foreclosure. And the houses, our job would be to come in there, clean them out, change the locks, cut the grass, shovel the snow, do some renovations or whatever. And it became a constant theme of going into these homes and these environments and seeing these family portraits back in the days when people actually took family portraits. And and I remember thinking what these families were like or what they went through. And and I remember seeing, we were going to homes and, the police in some of these affluent communities will come out and think that we were breaking into the home because the family was so ashamed or so embarrassed of what they were going through that they never alluded to anyone in the neighborhood that this was happening, and we had to show documentation. In some cases, we would go in and the house would be completely vandalized. In some cases, we would go in and the people will still be there. They'll ignore all the notices from the bank at the time or whoever was dealing with them or communicating with them. And I remember saying, as I was sitting on the stoop of this house and getting this news from a partner, what if there was a company that sort of worked with people that were going through transitions? And she said, huh? I said, what if we created a company that focused on transitioning people that are going through life-changing events, similar to the ones that we're dealing with? And she's like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. How do you plan on marketing that? I said, I don't know. And at that point, I got out of the commercial business. I shut everything down. I opened up a new office at the time in Milton. I changed the company name from Top-Notch Quality Service, which was more broad and generic because it wanted to be all-encompassing, and it was more service-based, to a company at that time, Top-Notch Transitional Services. And no one understood what I was thinking 10 years ago. What I was thinking, 10 years ago, I was thinking of the future. I had a vision of the past and a view of the future, and I was thinking of transition. And they were thinking, transgender. They was thinking transition in prison, and they were laughing at me. And they laughed at me, and they laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed. And I had to deal with that. But I knew my vision. And many times in life, your maker, God, whoever you believe in, your spirit, your spirituality, it gives you a vision of what they want you to pursue. And at that time, my vision, told me that this was the direction I needed to pursue. But there was no platform. There was no, at the time, there was Yellow Book, there was Yellow Pages, there was, there was directory advertisement. service magics, and things like that. But they were all category based.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to advertise for a painter, for a plumber, for a carpenter, construction. There was no category for transitions, even though I urged them to do it in my behest, but they didn't want
Mm-hmm.
to do it. So I would literally have to go out as the salesperson at the company, and go out and meet with carpenters, meet with clients that filled out forms for various services. And I would just ask them, why are you doing this? What are you doing this for? And I would get the same answers over and over and over again. There's a death in my family. My mom's downsizing. And then we ran into the hoarding situation. The very first hoarding project that I ran into was a former junior high principal who friend came to her home and recognized the living condition that she was in, and she didn't know where to go. She's never seen anything like that before, and her friend that she's been friends with all through their career at the school never let her in the home. She's always met her at the door, met her in the parking lot, but this particular time, she was going through some health issues, and she welcomed her inside the home. And she came in and she recognized this living condition that she's never experienced or seen before. And she contacted, at the time, us, thinking it was just junk removal company that can come in and just deal with throwing things away, because that's what happens when the family come across these scenarios. That a lot of things go through their head. Initially,
Mm-hmm.
this is junk. This is donations. This is cleaning. This is but they don't at that time, and even up until this moment, most people don't know that there are companies that deal with it. And I remember meeting with the client and meeting with the teacher, and I mean the former principal, and she was a very beautiful, warm soul, but she clearly had lost her way. There was things that she was dealing with and things that were dealing with her, in this environment that she was living in that was toxic in every imaginable form. So we came in, and we did some renovations, we did some cleanup, we did some organizing, and we got familiar with the mental health aspect of what this disorder was. And that was the earlier days. And at that point, I didn't know much about it. And we learned so much from her, and so much was garnered from other clients that we took on thereafter. But at that point, Chop Notch Transitional Services was still the brand, and it was still me chopping at the bit, asking families what they were going through and trying to figure out different ways to come up with a company that can sort of deal with all the nuances that go into, something that most of us think is very simple, like mom or dad are getting older, maybe one of your parents passed away, and you're thinking, okay, we're going to go into this family homestead that's been in the family for 40, 50 years, and we're just going to move her. But what you don't realize is there's an emotional attachment to that home, those possessions. You learn more about a person from their home than any other facet of their life, than the car they
Mm-hmm.
drive, the music they listen to. Your home tells you, so that's where you sit, where you spend most of your time, where you neglect most of your time, where you don't even want to be, or where you spend most of your time again. So
Mm-hmm.
I've learned so much in this journey, that eventually from Top Notch Transitional Services, we became LifeCycle Transitions,
Mm-hmm.
another moniker that basically was created in celebration of life and the changes that we all go through in different points of our life, expected or unexpected, or premeditated or reactionary. Life and change is what we do. And my job as a transition expert over the past 12 years is to save lives or change them. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been one of the most gratifying journeys that I can ever imagine.
And when I thank you for sharing that, there's so much I want to say, because I use this podcast as a teaching moment. As Brandon talked about his transition to getting to life cycles, where his business didn't start with life cycles. I just want to kind of encourage people, where you won't know where you're heading if you don't start, right? So you had to start in order to know this is where you were going to go, and it wasn't a linear thing. It's not like a straight line.
Oh,
So that's
absolutely.
one of the points. And
It
I'm sure
wasn't.
in your like people probably come to you and seeing what you're doing and stuff. I'm sure you're really transparent about that. Like you didn't just start like this. That's a huge part.
No, no. It's when we came up with the concept life cycle, a transition company in general, which is now LifeCycle Transitions. It was a company that was all inclusive. that handle issues mentally, physically, and emotionally. What would
Mhm.
take a family 60, 90 days to do, we can get done in less than 30 days. And I was the first company to say, look, I want to create a platform that covers everything that a person needs. And it's not a bronze, platinum, or gold. It's a transition that's fully customizable,
Yeah.
adaptable, and transparent. We go into a situation and it starts with an evaluation assessment that usually lasts between 3 to 5 hours. And we
Mhm.
sit with that client. We will understand the trajectories of their health, their finances, their emotional well-being, their mental well-being, and their physical capabilities. And then we figure out a way to triangulate a path that's suitable for that person. And I was the first person to say, let's, I got a client because I had so many clients that I was meeting with, and they said, I love your service, I love what you're offering. And because I realized in the earlier days from working in property preservation that there were so many houses that were hitting the market prematurely, and there were basically susceptible to realtors that were basically backdooring grandma and granddad's home to a friend who's an investor. And I was saying, do you know what you can do with these properties if you were to slap a coat of paint and maybe
Mhm.
update some of that shag carpeting, or maybe
Mhm.
change the garments or depersonalize your home? And I would go to realtors and I would say, listen, why don't you give a comparable analysis, meet with my client, and sort of encourage them that this is the direction and we can work collaboratively. And the realtor would come in and say, oh, no, don't worry about it. The new home buyers are going to deal with that. So I had that challenge. And then I had the other challenge of working with the healthcare department. Excuse my
Mhm.
language. I mean, working with clinical professionals. I was the first to get on the phone with these clients and say, yeah, I can handle so much. I can handle some of these ancillary supplemental things that need to be done from a physical standpoint. But Mrs. Smith or Mr. Brown, they need additional help that I'm not qualified to be able
Yeah.
to do on a long-term basis. And I would get on the phone and call therapists. I would call psychiatrists. I would call them and say, listen, I want a place that I can refer my clients underneath our platform. And some were very receptive towards that, and others, basically shunned me off. Like, who's this guy? Who's this guy?
Mhm.
Who does he think
Mhm.
he is? And the same thing with the assisted livings and the independent livings, and trying to look at and financial planners.
Yeah.
I envisioned 10 years ago a platform that was designed to help people transition in every imaginable facet of their life. And it's not
Mhm.
about junk removal. It's not about cleaning. It's about people. It's about people helping people get through real life situations. And I'm blessed to say that we've been doing this for 12 years, and I have transitioned over 1,000 people in the past 12 years.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think that when you think about the way that people have gotten into, because anybody, I'm susceptible to it like you are, like anybody can get into the situation because life happens and when we least expect it. And I think like having somebody like your team, it sounds like you come in and you really help people, like you educate them and help them see the realities for people that may have a family or friend. Because you talked about this person, your first kind of case of hoarding, who may have a friend or a family member that are struggling.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes because they don't understand the mental aspect of it, they get frustrated with them or they push them
Yeah.
aside. And like, do you have any like words of encouragement or something to say to them to help them understand what's going on?
I mean, every situation is different. I mean, I can
Mhm.
go through the spectrum of how hoarding is associated with trauma, and these belongings in some form or fashion gives the client or the person who's suffering from hoarding a sense of insulation from the outside world. Um,
Mhm.
in some cases, it's not. Some cases, it's just a person who just doesn't have the time, energy, or resources to just take out the trash.
Mhm.
And that's why there are different variations of hoarding, whether it's silogomania, whether it's bibliomania. There's different
Well, I didn't
situations,
know that.
and that 3 to 5 hour evaluation assessment allows us the ability to classify and diagnose what variation of hoarding is involved, so that we can pair that project with the appropriate technicians that can do the work that needs to be done.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but every scenario starts with an attachment in more cases than not. In some cases, like whether it's a 80-year-old lady client who grew up in a recession, and depression era, and believes that everything is going to have a purposeful use at some point or another, or it's a person who lost their loved one and they
Mhm.
can't have a hard time getting rid of the things that belong to that person. I tell people, if you don't think that hoarding is real, let me ask you this: if you've been in your home for over 20 years, I'm gonna tell you that you got a 2,000 square foot home, and you're gonna have to downsize that into 500 and see how quickly or how difficult it's gonna be for you to get rid of your belongings.
Yeah.
And I don't work in just hoarding. I work in change, and change is something that most of us don't realize we have a difficult time embracing. Ask anyone who's recently retired how that transformation or transition is, or a transplant, or going through a divorce or a breakup. I really focus a lot of our efforts in the physical things of hoarding. Manifests itself in different areas, and we pride ourselves in just trying to understand why. And I think that's what's been the key to our success over the past 12 years, is just simply asking why. These why questions that no one has really given
Yeah.
any interest in.
Right. They look at the behavior, they look at the condition, but not really go deeper. And so they get dismissed. They're really under misunderstood population, I bet.
In the earlier days, I would ask questions, probing questions, and just ask questions when I'm sitting down with a client, and and to a point where some of them would start crying, being emotional, but really crying, and I would, yeah, it would be peeling away an onion, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I was digging deeper than I think they expected me to be able to do, and them
Mhm.
be able to do as well.
Mhm.
But I felt like it was a necessary because I wanted to make sure that this company was about healing. So when we
Mhm.
talk about holistic, and I know, and I put that out there as a transition expert, our philosophy is more in holistic direction. Most people get lost in that because they assume we're just an organizing or cleaning or junk removal or whatever company.
Yeah.
No, it's about sustainability. How do we avoid throwing good money at bad money or wasting good effort on poor
Yeah.
results? How do we make you feel better, not just today, but tomorrow and the day after? And how do we look at the world that you've been tortured by for so many years and introduce you to different way of living? I mean, we're transitioning people from a home that they've been in for 40, 50 years, 60 years
Yeah.
into community living, assisted livings, independent livings, and introducing them to that is a very delicate process that requires a lot of love
Yeah.
and a lot of compassion.
So with life cycles, it's not just hoarding. Like somebody could be going to assistant living, but just struggling with the transition and helping them get their property ready or helping them. Okay, so you do all of that, all of these transitions that people are in the process of. Like that's where your company comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening right now is that people are literally dying in these environments that are compromised. And let me explain to you how. The EPA did a study that showed indoor toxins at an all-time high. People are going to the doctors and they're being misdiagnosed with respiratory and pulmonary diseases and infections that the
Yeah.
doctors and so forth are unaware that these individuals are living in. I mean, people died from the Dust Bowl, and what's happening and what happens is how I come into the fold is because something happens, something's going to happen, or something needs to happen, and it's whether it's a trip, it's a fall, or an injury, or a diagnosis of
Mm.
illness. They go into an emergency situation, they get hospitalized, and from being hospitalized, they end up in a skilled nursing home. And at that point, they notify their discharge planner, their social worker, or their case manager on what's going on, and they say this living environment that I'm dealing with has been compromised. And our
Mm.
job as a transition company is to help them transition back home so that they can live out their days in their home or realize that the home isn't the home that they need to go into. So we then find alternate living environments. And recently, we just acquired a home care company because we understand the value and the significance of an all-inclusive offering, where we think through home care, a lot of these things can be managed in much greater detail on a more
Yeah.
sustainable level that currently isn't necessarily being monitored.
Wow, that's amazing. And I was gonna make a point about the transition part. So I just lost my train of thought because you said something that I was like, wow, that's amazing. But basically all different types of transition and yeah, I lost my train of thought. but it'll come back
Yeah.
to me. Um, so I think that's really dope what you're doing. And I think that your vision, like with the case manager calling you, like your vision about what you've seen happening is coming full circle now. Like everything's coming full circle with what you wanted to see happen little by little.
It is, it's coming full circle. It's a work in progress. Every
Hmm.
day we're learning something new about something old, and we're
Hmm.
taking that perspective and understanding and making sure that we make the necessary adjustments. If anybody that's listening to this podcast or watching it, if they take from what we are, who we are, then what I want them to understand is that we are the best at dealing with hoarding cases and on
Hmm.
most of the extreme situations you can imagine. We've done hundreds and hundreds of hoarding scenarios, which is why being the new host of the show Hoarders was a great transition for them and as well as for us.
Hmm.
But we're bigger than the sum of those parts, and our clients find that out when they contact us, when they meet with us, when they deal with us. That we're not just going to go there and just do these rigid things. We're going to go in with an understanding of how this happened, what happened, and how we can avoid it from happening again. And that's going to be our testament for many years, hopefully, as we stay in the space as a transition company.
Yes, you are, yes, and so Brandon was featured on Hoarders, which was so amazing to see, because clearly they seen something in what you're doing. And so this is kind of his bio from the A&E show, really popular show called Hoarding. So it kind of shows, I mean, they're not, I mean, it's clear that you are expert in what you do for them to reach out to you to kind of come on and be a part of that. And I think that one of the things I'm curious about is, because I'm in a helping profession too, how do you take care of yourself when you're seeing all this stuff? And
Well, that's a good question. Self care is very important, and I think we're moved away from a generation of just pulling yourself up by your bootstraps or just be strong. I think the strongest person is vulnerable to their weakest moments, and understanding and embracing those things has been uh, a journey and a transformation for me on a spiritual level.
okay,
I try to eat healthy. I get as much rest as I can. I even hike. I disconnect from this world and connect
nice.
with my body, my soul, my spirit on a higher level.
Good, good,
Um,
good, good. Okay.
but but one of the things that Life Cycle is moving in our newest venture is we're taking the health and wellness component, and we're going to be launching our own health and wellness line, which from working in these
Wow.
environments for so many years, we understand how important it is to take care of people from looking at and experimenting with CBD and oils and nutrition and
Hmm.
supplements and things that give people rest, but also from a health and wellness standpoint. We're one of the first companies. I keep saying one of the first companies, but um, about 9 years ago, I went to Tufts Health Plan, and I mentioned to them, the significance of having a company like us work with them from a healthcare standpoint. And they took a chance with us, and it's been a fruitful relationship ever since. Where we work with the healthcare companies to be able to augment and implement some of these services and some of these ideas. And the health and wellness line for Life Cycle is going to be one of the biggest things that we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on, as well as the home care. But it's still tried and true as a hoarding specialist, all underneath the transition umbrella.
That's amazing. I remember what I wanted to say. I just want to say it because it's important. I'm sorry. When you talked about people being in their homes and going to the respiratory stuff, I had a mold expert on here a few months ago, and he talked about how we're spending more times in our homes. And a lot of people were the sicknesses they're not realizing like it's from the things that are happening. Because I mean, with anything, you like a car, you get a car, it doesn't just stay new the whole time. You got to maintenance it and stuff like that.
Right.
And so like I just wanted to kind of to your point, I'm sure there's a lot more people that you're seeing with the pandemic because they're spending so much time in their home and maybe self-medicating with things, just to kind of feel like that void. So I'm sure that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that I ask clients, I say, they put filters on things for a reason, and I said, what? They said, what?
Yeah.
I said, when was the last time you've changed your filter in your home?
Yeah.
And you'll be surprised at how many of us don't understand that you have these filters in your duct systems that need to be cleaned. And that's the same scenario that happens in a lot of these homes that are neglected, is that they're breathing in this recycled air. And we learned that recently with the mask, and how so many of us were
Yeah.
having some respiratory issues because we were breathing in this cycled air. And that simulates itself in an environment that's not necessarily hygienic, and that's not sterilized or cleaned properly. And the windows and the places and breathing, that you're recycling these air,
Yeah.
this poor air quality, that's ultimately leading to respiratory
Yeah.
compromised respiratory issues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, I know it was important what I wanted to say, but yes. So for people listening, like that's something that's important to kind of understand in your home, and I know I can only imagine what you're seeing now. I just want to say, so everybody heard Brandon's story, because I feel like my podcast is like a teaching thing too. They
Uh,
laughed at him.
yeah,
And so people are gonna laugh at you. People are not gonna understand your vision. If you're into the Bible, you know, Joseph had his brothers sold him to slavery because they
yeah.
didn't want to see him win. And so like looking at where you are, acquiring the
Mhm.
home care company, the health and wellness, and this is like something that, like, when you talk about holistic and the things that you're doing, it's literally what this podcast is about. I have people on in different areas of life just to kind of share what they're doing. So like I'm so grateful for you for coming on here doing that. Tell me, where do you see life cycles going? If it's a secret, it's okay, because I know
No,
Joseph told people he got sold into slavery. So
yeah, man, listen, you don't tell them everything, but
I
listen,
know.
it's
Tell
funny.
me what.
Like, I tell people this. I mean, uh, the thing is when you look at what I do, and from the outside, it's simple for someone to say, and it's, I've heard it all the time. Why didn't I think of that? Or why can't I do that? Right? And the thing that comes to mind is, like, when I was 8 years old, I wanted Reese cups, but my family didn't have enough money for me to eat Reese cups the way I wanted to eat them. But so I said, Reese cup sounds like a very simple idea. Why don't I just go get some Hershey's chocolate and get some Skippy's peanut butter, and I mixed it together, and I put my little fork marks around it, and I freezed it in a freezer and took it out of there. And it didn't taste like a Reese cup. Somewhere along the lines, they figured out the torques needed to be smoothed out. And that's sort of what it's like when you
Did you
look
really
at
do that
someone like
though?
you, Celeste. No, it's like when they look at someone like you, Celeste, and they look at
Yeah.
your accomplishments and how you've taken this wonderful platform and you've evolved it and you've tweaked it, and they think, why can't I be Celeste? Well, because in many cases, people don't want to do what it takes to be successful, and what it takes to be successful is a very ghostly endeavor. And let me explain to you why. When you see something that nobody else see, when you believe something that no one else believes, in order to achieve something that very few people have achieved. What about that is not ghostly? And it's about a vision, and it starts with a vision, and it starts with a person following true to something that they believe in their heart, even
Yeah.
when everything around them is telling them otherwise, even when all their friends and all the women or the guys that they want to pursue don't feel that where they are at this particular journey in their life is adequate enough. They still follow that, they pursue that endeavor. And like you, I had to do the same thing. So
Mhm.
what I leave people with when it comes to being successful is to be willing to be lonely, be willing to experience the exhilarating highs and the excruciating lows.
Mhm.
And if you're able to weather those storms, then you're cut from a different cloth, potentially for a different storm. And that
Yeah.
storm is going to take you in many places, and it's going to pick you up, it's going to thrash you. But if you get up on your feet from it, then you're moving in the right direction.
Let me just say, I know Brandon personally, and I've like liked your posts. I've never heard you speak. You're really good at talking. You motivating me, and like you're really good at talking about this stuff. This is so amazing. Do you speak like regular? Do you speak like all the time on other platforms?
Let me tell you, here's an
You need
interesting thing.
to.
Here's an interesting thing, Celeste. I'm gonna be honest with you. And I very seldomly ever tell people this story. I started this business 12 years ago, and for the first eight, nine, actually first 9.5, 10 years, there was no social media posts. There was no media whatsoever. I did not want anyone to even know I existed. And the reason I didn't want people to know I existed is because we were living in a time and era where my clients, I feared were not going to accept me because of the
Oh,
color of my skin. And
yeah.
I deliberately made an attempt to mine to stay underneath the radar. I wanted this company to be what it needed to be for who it needed to be. And what came of it is on the eighth and ninth year, I realized that we had a generic company, a company that had no soul, they had no heart, they had no beat. No one knew any of these things. They didn't know the journey, they didn't know the story. But I sacrificed the ego, I sacrificed the vanity and the
Mhm.
bravado of coming front and center because I believe enough in what I wanted to accomplish. And that's in
Mhm.
a lot of cases, maybe not in this particular scenario, is what it takes to be successful in life. Is you have
Mhm.
to be willing to conceal like your intentions. And the art of
Mhm.
power is to misdirect people from thinking or knowing what your true intentions are. And sometimes they're looking at you and they're thinking, this guy ain't doing anything. I don't know, why does he still even have this company? Why, it doesn't seem like they're doing anything, but quiet as kept. You're still learning, you're still growing, you're still
Mhm.
evolving. And for me, I had to come out of captivity and it's in isolation for a couple of reasons. One is that the business needed a spokesperson. The business needed a soul. And the soul was always there. It was
It
me.
was always, yeah, I was gonna say
It was
you
always
you
me.
definitely was so
But the people who went to our website, who just visited, needed to have an understanding as to what is this
yeah.
company with this very unique model? Where did this come from? It just didn't fall from the sky. And then the
Yeah.
second thing was that I wanted kids who look like me,
Yeah.
minorities and young girls and people um, who are struggling to have someone that they can look at and to be
Yeah.
inspired by someone who went through certain things. Because when I was going through this, I didn't have any of those role models. I didn't have
Yeah.
a person that I can go to and say, I'm struggling with my business in this way. How can I get help? How can I get direction? How can I get assistance? So it became important for me in more ways than one to come out of captivity. And you are going to see a lot more of my speaking
I
engagements and a
I
lot more
better
motivation.
because I'm gonna be hitting you up like, yo, when's the next talk? Because I want to listen to it. This is
Yeah,
really good. This is good. I swear, y'all, I know him personally, and I'm inspired. So I already know they're gonna be inspired. Yeah, like it's and I say that because people, I inspire a lot of people by
yeah,
what I do, but I tell people the only reason why I'm able to do that is because I suck up a lot of that information, and
right,
so it's like in me. So like even though I know what you're saying, it
right,
feels good to hear. And I always encourage people to like really like if they gotta listen to tapes over and over again, the same thing until
right.
it
Yeah,
hits. Like, Les
yeah,
Brown says that all the time. He kept listening, that's our
yeah.
guy. Yeah, so this was really good. This is inspiring. If there's somebody that's inspired by your story, your journey, there's so many different things that you talked about, but if there's anybody inspired and want to work on change or transition, that's your word, transition.
Mhm.
What kind of things would you say to them?
I mean, just, if you're going through something and you're looking at what you're going through and you don't feel like it's going in the right direction, then you definitely need a soundboard. You really want to look at your trajectory. We all need to go through it. I mean, you go through it when you look at your health insurance, your life insurance. I mean, getting older is a way of life. Life is what
Yeah.
happens, when you're making plans. But
Mhm.
life cycle is what happens when you finally have a plan.
Yeah.
And you want to put it in motion and you want to execute it because
Yeah.
you believe that what's currently working, what currently is you're going through isn't working, and you want to do something different.
Yeah. Thank you. This is good. And you got to grieve, right? Like when you're trying to transition, you got to grieve what you had and
Ah.
work on change. Yeah.
I want to leave you with one quote. One of the quote that's also been a big part of my life. Um, it was told to me by a good friend of mine, Jimmy, who grew up on the west side of Chicago, and I remember sitting with him. And Jimmy was a struggling soul. He's a smart, very smart guy. He was savvy, he was witty, kind of guy to talk with his fingertips. He was from the blues era. And Jimmy told me, he said, a man that knows how will always have a job. He's good with his hands. Someone's going to hire him, whether it's to take out the trash or to sweep the floor.
Yeah.
But a man that knows why will always be his boss. I encourage
Yeah.
your viewers to stop thinking robotically and to start
Yes.
thinking logistically. You're not reinventing a wheel that's already been created, but you're simply trying to anticipate what direction it's going so you can capitalize on your destiny.
Yes, this is such a good this is the first episode of the year. This is such a good episode. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I knew it was gonna be good, but I didn't know it was gonna be this good. So thank you.
No, you're very welcome. Listen, it was a pleasure of mine to be on your show. I've been watching you. I've been seeing how you've been blossoming and progressing, and
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm so proud of you, and I'm so
Thank you.
encouraged by you continue doing what you do. There's so many people that you help, you support. When I was coming off with the show, and you were one of the few people that stepped forth and supported it. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, and I love you
Thank
dearly.
you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.